The grove beneath the pines. I found the envelope on a Tuesday, pressed flat beneath the weight of junk mail and catalogs. It was off-white, the kind that looked like it had aged without touch. There was no return address, only my full name, Elijah Thorne, in slanted black ink that shimmered like oil. Inside, a single card. The archivist is requested. The grove awaits. Come alone. No signature. No contact. But folded within the card was a train ticket to Sonoma County, and a key, cold, iron, and old-fashioned. Something about it bypassed my logic. I've worked in silent libraries for years. I catalog dust and secrets. This felt familiar, like a forgotten dream crawling back into daylight. I packed light. The train rolled past farmlands and foggy ridgelines. By the time I stepped off at a near-abandoned platform deep in Northern California, night had already swallowed the landscape. A man in a dark coat waited beside an idling car. He didn't speak. Just opened the door and nodded. The ride was silent except for the crunch of gravel and the occasional owl call slicing through the forest. An hour later, we turned into a long dirt road flanked by pine and sequoia. At its end, a wrought iron gate carved with a grotesque owl's face, mouth open wide. The man handed me the key. "It begins," he whispered. And the gate creaked open. The path beyond the gate was veiled in mist. Pine needles carpeted the ground like quiet footsteps before me. No street lights. Only the golden blink of fireflies drifting between trees, and the silhouette of massive trunks rising like pillars toward the heavens. The car that brought me here was gone. I didn't hear it leave. Ahead, a faint lamplight glowed beside a small cottage with a moss-dark roof and wooden shutters. I stepped closer. The door creaked open before I knocked. A man stood inside, stooped, expressionless. His beard was gray, his flannel shirt soaked with sap or something darker. He looked like someone carved from bark and solitude. "You're the archivist," he said, voice gravelly. I nodded. He stepped aside and let me in. The cottage was clean, bare. One chair. One kettle steaming faintly on a wood-burning stove. In the corner, a crate full of bound volumes, handwritten, all unmarked. "I keep the grounds," he said. "You'll keep the records." That's the deal. I tried to ask who sent the letter. Who owned the estate. But he just looked past me, toward the woods. "You'll sleep in the librarian's cabin. Been empty for a long time." He handed me a lantern and a map, drawn in red ink on aged parchment. No labels. Just symbols, circles, crosses, a sprawling tree at the center, and beneath it, a shape that looked almost like an eye. "Stay on the trail," he said. "They start arriving tomorrow." "Who?" He didn't answer. I left the cottage and followed the path north, the lantern flickering with each step. Somewhere behind me, an owl called once, then again. The cabin waited just beyond a bend, a small wooden structure with a stone chimney and an oak door carved with glyphs I didn't recognize. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and ink. On the desk, a blank ledger. On the wall, an antique clock, its hands unmoving, yet softly ticking. The bed looked unused but still warm. I lay down, and the last thing I saw before sleep took me was the moonlight falling through the window, shaped like a feathered wing. I woke to bells. Low, distant chimes echoing through the trees. Not church bells, deeper, slower, like iron gongs struck underwater. The clock on the wall still hadn't moved, but the light had changed. A pale, blue-gray dawn filtered through the branches, and with it came the first signs of life. Voices. I stepped outside the cabin, the earth damp beneath my boots. Down the winding path toward the inner grove, shadows moved between trees, figures cloaked in robes of deep burgundy and forest green, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Some carried lanterns. Others held scrolls. One moved slowly, clutching a staff carved to look like a serpent swallowing its own tail. No one spoke to me. They passed as though I were fog or bark or part of the very land. I followed them, cautiously, to a clearing where the trees opened wide to form a natural amphitheater. At its center stood a towering owl effigy, its eyes inlaid with something black and shining. It looked ancient, not built, but grown into being. Benches ringed the space in perfect symmetry. A stone platform jutted forward like a stage, etched with runes that pulsed when touched by morning light. The robed figures gathered silently. Some held hands. Others knelt. All looked toward the platform. The man with the serpent staff stepped forward. I recognized his voice immediately, the groundskeeper. He raised his hands and spoke only one word. "Commence." From the shadows, two others emerged. One carried a small wooden chest. The other, a bowl made of what looked like obsidian. They set them at the owl's base. Then everyone but me, began to hum. A sound that didn't rise in pitch or tempo, but expanded outward, wrapping around the trees like a breath held too long. I watched from behind a cypress trunk, unseen. And as the hum deepened, the chest opened on its own. Inside, I saw feathers. But not from any bird I knew. They shimmered like ink in moonlight, curling gently as though still alive. One of the robed figures wept without sound. And in that moment, something behind my ribs fluttered. Not fear. Not awe. Recognition. When the ceremony ended, they vanished. The robed figures disappeared into the mist without footsteps, and the clearing fell quiet once again. Only the owl effigy remained, watching with eyes too old for stone. I returned to the cabin, though I couldn't recall the path I took. Inside, the desk that had once held a blank ledger now bore a book. A heavy, leather-bound volume that hadn't been there before. No title on the spine. No name on the cover. I opened it. The first page was filled with symbols I didn't recognize. Lines and loops, dots and claws. But the second page held something stranger. You have begun. You will not remember your beginning, nor your true name, until you reach the final page. The grove requires forgetting before it allows truth. The next several pages were blank, except for faint impressions, like someone had written on the paper above them, and the pressure left echoes. I flipped forward. Page 47 bore a sketch of a cabin. My cabin. In the margins, a note. Never trust the clocks. Below it, a drawing of an owl, its eyes shaped like hourglasses. I closed the book. The light in the cabin flickered. My breath fogged in the air though there was no cold. And the clock on the wall, still unmoving, clicked once. Just once. As if it approved. I wandered the grove that evening. The sun was a pale suggestion through the trees, and the air smelled of lavender, smoke, and something else. Metallic and old, like rust in a dry throat. That's when I found the circle of pines. 12 trees in a perfect ring. Their trunks so tall and straight they resembled cathedral pillars. At the center, a depression in the earth, perfectly round, where nothing grew. No moss. No weeds. Just black soil and silence. I stepped toward it. Each footfall sank just slightly deeper than expected, as if the forest were exhaling beneath me. The moment I reached the center, every sound stopped. Even the birds. Even the wind. A whisper touched my ear from nowhere. The archivist watches. The grove listens. I turned, no one. But at the base of one pine, carved low where only the kneeling would see, were the same glyphs from the leather-bound book. I copied them into a notebook from my satchel. As soon as I finished the last symbol, a gust of wind scattered pine needles in a perfect spiral around me. Then sound returned. First birdsong. Then branches creaking. Then the ticking of that unmoving clock. Though I was nowhere near the cabin. I left the circle quickly, but not running. The grove doesn't like running. It was near midnight when I heard the knock. 3 soft taps on the cabin door. Then silence. I rose slowly. The fire had gone out. I hadn't lit it. Outside stood a woman. Not robed. Not glowing. Just a woman in a long coat, her hands in her pockets, and a distant look in her eyes like she hadn't slept in years. "You're Elijah?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm Dr. Miriam Wren. I was the archivist before you." I let her in. She didn't speak for several minutes. Just stared at the fireless hearth. "They call us, one at a time," she said finally. "We never know who sends the invitation, only that we accept. The grove makes sure of it." I offered her tea, but she shook her head. I thought I'd left. I even woke up in my own bed once. But I still smelled pine. And the clocks were wrong. She pulled a folded map from her coat. It was identical to mine, but older, more worn. Some paths were circled in red. Others crossed out entirely. "There's a clearing that doesn't stay in one place. It moves at night. I think that's where the truth lives. Or at least the memory of it." She rose to go. "Be careful with the book. It doesn't like being read too quickly." And then she was gone. No footsteps. No sound. Just the quiet return of the ticking. The fire appeared on the 3rd night. Not in the hearth. Not in the woods. In the sky. A vertical ribbon of flame hung between 2 redwoods like a torn curtain of heat. It didn't spread. It didn't burn. It just shimmered, suspended and silent. I stood in the clearing with 24 others. None of us spoke. All wore robes now. Even me. Mine had been waiting at the foot of my bed when I woke that morning. A man beside me leaned forward. "They're watching," he whispered. "From the other side." "Who?" "The originals. The ones who planted the grove." Before I could ask more, the flames flickered and collapsed into a single ember, a floating point of light that zipped down, hovered above the owl effigy, then vanished into the trees. The robed figures turned in unison and walked toward the forest. Their feet left no prints. But I saw one thing the others missed. The owl's eyes blinked. Dr. Miriam Wren was gone the next morning, but her journal wasn't. It lay on the cabin table, waiting like a loyal dog. The first entry was dated 11 years ago, written in tight cursive. "I came to the grove in spring. Thought it was a retreat. Thought it was research. I stayed because it asked me to." She'd drawn diagrams, intersecting symbols, ley lines, maps of the forest that didn't match any satellite image I could find. In one margin she wrote, "The grove is sentient. But not alive in the way we understand it." Further entries were inconsistent. Some pages contained entire essays on ancient rituals, lost languages, and the idea of memory as a living thing. Others were just repeated phrases. "The owl remembers what the moon forgets. The fire is not a warning, it's a mirror." One line chilled me more than the rest. "Every archivist leaves something behind. Not all of them mean to." I closed the journal. My hands smelled like ash. That night, I followed the ember trail. A narrow footpath opened where none had been before, lined with mushrooms that glowed faintly blue and pulsed like breathing. The trees on either side leaned in. I heard whispers, but not in any language I knew. Still, I understood them. "You do not walk. You are being carried." The path descended, gradually, then steeply, into what felt like a hollow inside the earth. The deeper I went, the warmer the air became. Not unpleasantly. comforting, like a memory of childhood summers. Then, a door. Wooden. Ornate. Carved with the image of a man with the head of an owl, holding a book in one hand and a lantern in the other. It opened before I could knock. Inside, silence, warm air, and rows upon rows of books. Stacked to the ceiling. Bound in leather, cloth, tree bark, stone. No titles. Only symbols on the spines. A table in the center. A chair. A page already open. You are the 42nd. You will not be the last. The words had appeared in my handwriting. I ran. I don't remember returning to the cabin. But I woke in bed, boots still on, a pinecone in my pocket. Someone stood in the doorway. Not robed. Not normal. He looked like a man, tall, with hollow cheeks and pale eyes, but where his arms should have been were branches, dark and splitting into dozens of finger-like twigs. He didn't speak. He just stared. I couldn't move. Behind him, the owl effigy glowed faintly, as if moonlight came from inside it. The branch man raised one limb slowly, not in threat, but almost in sorrow, and pointed to the journal on my table. I turned. A new line had appeared on the open page. He remembers your face. When I looked back, the man was gone. But my door was open, and the scent of burning cedar hung in the air. I dreamed of roots. Endless tunnels beneath the grove, woven from thick cords of black wood and coiled like veins under skin. In the dream, I followed them, crawling deeper, deeper, until the roots began to glow faintly, and I realized they weren't wood at all. They were nerves. When I awoke, my hands were stained with dirt. Under my nails, slivers of dark bark I didn't recognize. And beneath my bed, a root had broken through the floorboards. It pulsed. That night, the sky turned black. No stars. No moon. Even the fireflies flickered out. The grove stood still. No wind, no calls, no whispers. I stepped outside, lantern in hand, only to find every other cabin empty. Doors swung open. Beds left unmade. Teacups still warm. A bell rang once. A single note, drawn out like a held breath. Then came footsteps. Dozens of them, moving in unison. Not toward me, but past me, toward the owl effigy. The ceremony was beginning again. But this time, the owl blinked twice. And the fire burned blue. On the cabin wall, a scroll had appeared. It hadn't been there the day before. The ink was red. The language, Latin, but a crude translation had been scrawled beside it. Rules of the Grove. 1. Speak nothing of the sky. 2. Walk clockwise at dawn, counter at dusk. 3. Feed the fire once a week. 4. Never write your real name. 5. Return what you borrow. 6. The archivist must not sleep too long. 7. Don't wake the tree at the center. I turned toward the map Dr. Wren had left me. One location had been circled in black. In small script beside it. Root Heart. Do not go alone. I went alone. The path twisted like a serpent, leading me farther than the map claimed. The trees thinned, then disappeared entirely, replaced by stone monoliths, each covered in feathers and eyes carved deep into the grain. At the center of a circular basin, I saw it. A massive tree, dead, but not fallen. Its bark was cracked like old paper, but its center glowed with soft light. It had no leaves. Only pages. Thousands of them, fluttering like dead feathers. Each one bore a name, inked in dozens of scripts. Some names I recognized. Miriam Wren. Elijah Thorne. Some hadn't been born yet. A voice in the wind. The grove remembers you before you arrive. I reached out and touched a page with my name. It crumbled into ash. That night, she returned. Dr. Wren stood outside the cabin, soaked in pine mist. Her eyes were tired, not red, just faded. "I didn't leave," she whispered. "Not really." She opened her coat. Beneath it, her chest bore inked pages, sewn into her skin with black thread. "The longer you stay, the more it writes on you." She held out a book, bound in gray leather. The spine read, "Elijah." "I tried to keep it blank," she said. Then she vanished again, not into mist, but into the trees. And her book remained in my hands, already growing warm. On the 7th night, they gave me a lantern. No fire inside, only a stone, round and smooth like an egg. When I held it up, the world dimmed. Sounds quieted. My thoughts slowed. The groundskeeper met me by the owl effigy. "You're ready to witness," he said. He handed me a scroll. It unrolled on its own, showing every face I'd seen since arriving, including mine, sketched in ink that moved, as if breathing. Only those who remember must forget. He placed the lantern in my hand, and suddenly, I could see the grove beneath the grove. Tunnels, altars, machines, and faces watching from behind bark. They met beneath the roots. Not in shadow, but in memory, a space folded between time and place. 7 figures in cloaks of moss and bone. None spoke. Each had a face made of something different: stone, mirror, bark, flame, smoke, crystal, and ink. They examined my ledger. Not the blank one from the cabin. The new one I hadn't realized I was writing, filled with entries I never remembered making. One of them, the mirror-faced one, turned to me. "You are the first to write your own ending." Then they all bowed. And vanished. Feathers rained from the trees the next day. Not birds. Not fallen. They rose from the earth like smoke, spiraling around me as I walked. Each one carried a sound, a bell, a name, a sigh. The path beneath my feet turned white. I followed it back to the circle of pines. The center was no longer empty. A book lay open on a pedestal of roots. Blank. Waiting. The wind whispered. "This is how the grove is fed." I took out my pen. I wrote the first line. The book hummed, low, content, and turned its own page. The trees whispered in full sentences now. They knew me by name. They remembered my past. My regrets. My reasons for coming. One tree leaned close and whispered, "You've always been here. This is not arrival. This is return." Another added, "You never left your cabin in Boston. You're asleep. You're dreaming us." I didn't argue. Because when I touched its bark, I saw my apartment. Covered in feathers. The bookshelves hollow. And the owl watching from the window. I found the wall of names beneath the roots. Hundreds of archivists. Carved into stone. Some names were whole. Some were half erased, as if the grove had started forgetting them. Some had been crossed out violently, as if by claw. And at the bottom, a single name had been carved just that day. Elijah Thorne. No date. No ending. Just a final line. The grove is its own memory. They gathered once more at the owl. The fire burned white now. Silent, blinding. Each figure dropped a feather into the flame. When my turn came, I held the book instead. The grove didn't stop me. The owl turned its head, for the first time, and blinked a third time. I stepped into the fire. It was not hot. It was a library. And the books whispered my name in every language ever written. The ground pulsed. Roots split the soil, rising like ribs from the earth. The owl effigy cracked and opened, not broken, just transformed. Inside it, a spiral staircase made of petrified wood. I descended, alone. Each step echoed with names. Not voices. Not shouts. Just names. And as I reached the bottom, the final page of the book turned itself. Blank. Waiting. The chamber below the owl held no books. Only names, carved into air itself. They shimmered like dust in candlelight, floating and circling like constellations. My name joined them, silently. I heard Miriam's name. The groundskeepers. Dozens of others. Some glowed. Some were fading. The grove whispered. Stories do not end. They return. And the lights dimmed. The forest breathed. Every tree bowed inward. The roots curled like arms. The sky darkened not in night, but in velvet sleep. My cabin no longer stood. Only a bed of moss remained, shaped like my body, warm, silent. I lay down, and the wind tucked me in with feathers. One last whisper. You are remembered. And I slept. There is a grove, deeper than dream. Older than forest. Wiser than flame. It remembers every footstep, every name, every archivist who wandered too far into memory and stayed. You may wake tomorrow in your own bed. Or you may still hear the owl. If you do, follow the map. Bring no clock. And never write your real name. The grove will welcome you. It always does.